It's an all-out battle royale in the United States. Each of the 50 states have splintered into countries of their own, and now they're all looking for a fight. But when it comes to the winner, there can only be one. There will be no alliances in this battle, with each state truly fending for itself. With that being said, we start with a true titan of the US, Texas. They say everything is bigger in Texas, and that's certainly the case when it comes to the state's sheer strength. Texas has over 166,000 military members that call the state home. Over 104,000 of those people are part of the Army. Of those 104,000 Army units, the National Guard numbers around 19,000 members, who maintain 117 armories in 102 communities throughout Texas. Add to that an additional 5,500 Marines, and you have a powerful land force. Guarding the Texas coast, you have over 13,000 units from both the Navy and the Coast Guard. And if that's not enough, there's over 42,000 Air Force personnel who also contribute to this powerhouse of a state. The Lone Star State's strategy then becomes simple. Defend itself using the National Guard and Navy while sending its Army and Air Force personnel out to attack others. It's a sound strategy, aided in no small part by Texas's geography. To the west of the state lie the Guadalupe Mountains. While not the largest or highest mountain range in the US, the range does include Guadalupe Peak, which has an 8,751-foot summit. Those mountain ranges will help Texas defend against incursions from the west as its army moves throughout the US. Also, much of far west Texas is covered by the Chihuahuan Desert. Stretching throughout portions of Arizona, New Mexico, and Mexico as well, the desert is North America's largest at 250,000 square miles. Texas is also ready to fuel its armies. The U.S. Energy Information Administration says that there are 20,309 million barrels of crude oil in the state, with those who aren't on fighting duty tasked with getting as much of that oil out of the ground as quickly as possible to keep the state's soldiers equipped with the fuel they'll need. Finally, there's the Texan X Factor. Its citizens. As of 2021, there were 1,006,555 registered firearms in Texas, easily making the state's citizens the most armed in the U.S. Texas has about twice as many guns as the second-place state, Florida, with 518,725, and that armed citizenry will be called upon if any other state is foolish enough to try and invade. Add to that an already growing appetite for independence in Texas, with 33% saying they'd support Texas splitting off as an independent country, and you have a state that's well-armed with citizens who are willing to fight. An early frontrunner emerges, but if another powerful state can increase their military by overtaking multiple states quickly, Texas could be in real trouble. So let's take a look at Texas's first move. Advancing quickly to the west, Texas puts New Mexico in its crosshairs. Militaristically, the state has no chance. Just over 17,000 personnel are stationed in New Mexico, with only about 3,500 of those being Army and Marines. Texas's ground forces are easily able to overwhelm them. The state does have a solid air force, however, with around 14,000 personnel. But again, Texas is able to overcome this. Its air force is 3 times the size of New Mexico's. That air force also allows Texas to easily navigate the portions of the Chihuahuan Desert that run through the state, making this fight an easy victory for Texas. New Mexico is out of the running early, thanks to Texas. Oklahoma is next. Oklahoma is a minnow compared to their southern neighbor, but they've got a few tricks up their sleeve. Initially, Oklahoma's roughly 21,000 soldiers aren't able to stand up to the might of the Texan army. But Oklahoma can take advantage of its own geography. Its soldiers try to funnel the Texans into the expansive Red Beds plains and high plains, leaving them open to bombing runs by the over 10,000 Air Force personnel stationed in the state. But that tactic doesn't take Oklahoma too far, especially once its Air Force is confronted by Texas's superior aerial might. Granted, the Arbuckle Mountains to the central south of the state forced Texas to invade from the southwest, again landing in Great Plains territory, but there's nothing Oklahoma can do in terms of sheer manpower. Another state down. Texas continues its rampage to the east, turning its attention to Arkansas, Mississippi, and Louisiana. Its tactic is becoming clear: create a buffer region of states that surround it, making it even more difficult for other states to invade Texas itself. Arkansas goes down quickly. It only has around 8,000 total active military personnel, who are no match for a Texan military that's more than 13 times its size. Louisiana's 30,000 soldier military put up more of a fight, though the state also offers Texas an opportunity to use its navy. Louisiana's long coast bordering the Gulf of Mexico is only defended by about 2,400 Navy and Coast Guard personnel. Easy pickings for the same Texan group of over 13,000. Finally, there's Mississippi. The state has the same problems as Louisiana, as its installed military numbers around 25,000, and it has a coast leading into the Gulf of Mexico. The key difference? It has a much larger Navy and Coast Guard. The state holds out for a while with its 5,300 personnel fighting valiantly against Texas, but with just 10,300 Army and Marines on the ground, Mississippi's Navy will ultimately be left out to sea without a friendly port to return to. So, Texas just occupies Mississippi's Navy until its ground forces can take the state. With 5 states down, Texas takes a moment to consolidate, while 2 other challengers are consolidating their own power in the east and west. We'll start in the west, where California is throwing its weight around. With 32 military bases, including Naval Base San Diego, which is the home port of the powerful Pacific Fleet, California has the strongest military presence in the United States, with 213,600 total soldiers. Break it down, and you get 34,600 Army soldiers, 61,500 Marines, 29,100 Air Force personnel, 5,600 Coast Guard members, and the California X Factor, the Pacific Fleet, which includes 82,900 sailors. California quickly puts that fleet to work, focusing on one of the most isolated states in the U.S., Hawaii. Hawaii has sat back and watched as Texas completed its rampage. It had hoped to sit out until the other states had weakened themselves, defending itself by virtue of being nearly 2,400 miles away from San Francisco. Nestled in the Pacific Ocean, it has a fairly decent military presence of 54,300 soldiers, divided across several islands. But they're not a match for California's powerful navy. The Pacific Fleet is sent out, buffeting Hawaii from every angle. Soon sounds the death knell for the Aloha State. Constant missile bombardments coupled with strikes from aircraft taking off from the USS Nimitz overwhelm the islands before they can become a major threat. California has its first victory. Soon, California's land-based forces of the Army, Marines, and Air Force are moving east across the U.S. Nevada is the next obvious target. An easy victory for California, as Nevada only has 4,800 Marines and Army soldiers compared to California's 96,000. Still, the 50,000 square mile Mojave Desert presents an obstacle. Though it's the smallest desert in North America, the Mojave is also the driest and represents a large portion of flat land the California Army has to navigate. It does so while being buffeted by airstrikes from the large, nearly 13,000-strong Air Force stationed in Nevada. But California was smart. It has an Air Force of its own, 29,100 strong, and it uses those craft to bomb Las Vegas, Reno, and everywhere in between to take Nevada. That tactic of supporting an army with overwhelming air power serves California well as it attacks Oregon. By this time, the Pacific Fleet has started to make its way back from attacking Hawaii, and it's helpful in taking the Beaver State. California barely has to put any boots on the ground. Oregon's 32,600 military personnel quickly fall to the state's combined aerial and naval power. Meanwhile, Texas has turned its attention to Arizona. The home of the Grand Canyon benefits from vast desert tracts, as well as the canyon itself, making it difficult for an invading force to march. The problem is that Texas has a massive advantage. The almost 31,000 military personnel from Arizona can't do a thing to stop Texas's military, which is almost 6 times stronger. And with that, Texas arrives at the southeastern border of California, preparing another attack. California has been using the Pacific Fleet to attack Washington as this happens. Again, the overwhelming force of that fleet and its missile strikes win the day. Washington can do little to fight against the Pacific Fleet when its Navy and Coast Guard only have about 26,000 members. Again, California doesn't have to put boots on the ground other than to finalize taking the state, as its Navy and Air Force do the work. With that job done, the Pacific Fleet heads back towards Naval Base San Diego. It's going to be forced into a defensive mode soon enough. Texas plans to invade from the southeast, using the newly taken Arizona as its entry point. That's not the easiest route, though. Arid plains, mountains, and dunes impede the progress of its ground forces. The Sierra Nevada mountain range pushes Texan forces through a choke point into California's south, ideal for the Pacific Fleet to start bombarding them with missiles and aerial firepower. A standoff develops. Texas can pour troops through California's southeast with little resistance on the ground, though the presence of the Pacific Fleet can warn them off. All the while, Florida is advancing from the east. Florida has the fifth largest military presence in the U.S., with 102,700 personnel. It has a solid mix of Army and Marines, together equaling 31,300 units, though it's the Navy, Coast Guard, and Air Forces that are the standouts. 40,400 and 31,000 personnel respectively make up Florida's forces. As mentioned earlier, it also has a powerful civilian army, thanks to more than 500,000 registered firearms being in the state. Much like Texas, Florida will maintain its citizens, keeping them armed and ready to fight against invading forces. Georgia and Alabama are first on the Floridian agenda. Alabama puts up a good fight thanks to its 19,000-strong Army and Marines being almost a match for Florida's similar ground forces. But while the bay just outside of Alabama's capital, Mobile, gives Alabama quick access to the Gulf, it also gives Florida's superior Navy a direct route to the seat of Alabama. Alabama's 1,300 Navy and Coast Guard fall easily to their 40,000 Floridian counterparts. It looks like Alabama's days are over. Georgia, however, presents more of a problem for Florida. Its 110-mile coastline might provide plenty of entry points for the Floridian Navy, but the 15 barrier islands give Georgia some strategic positions from which they can defend. Additionally, it shares a border with Florida and has 67,800 Army and Marines, compared to Florida's 31,300. How could Florida make up the difference? Well, it's here that Florida's heavily armed citizenry comes into play. 500,000 people defend Florida as Georgia is buffeted by aerial strikes and naval attacks. Eventually, the state falls, though its army puts a big dent in Florida's civilian defenses. With those border states secured, Florida turns its attention to Texas. Its naval and aerial forces station themselves in the Gulf of Mexico as its army marches toward Texas. The ground forces face little resistance as they move through Mississippi and Louisiana, as Texas has pulled the bulk of its forces to fight against California. So it's not long before Floridian soldiers are approaching the eastern border of Texas. As this is happening, a great fight is waged between North and South Carolina. The former has a clear advantage militarily, thanks to having nearly 115,000 military personnel compared to South Carolina's 53,600. The Blue Ridge Mountains in South Carolina's northwestern corner offer it small respite, though they're not enough to stop North Carolina from marching in. The aerial and naval battles are fairly evenly matched, but North Carolina's large contingent of Marine Corps is its X factor. 40,800 Marines versus South Carolina's 8,200 ultimately leads to a North Carolina victory. But that victory is short-lived. So swept up in fighting South Carolina, North Carolina forgets about Virginia. The latter's mountainous west has helped defend it against Tennessee, though that state only has 20,100 military personnel to begin with. But to its north, North Carolina is vulnerable to incursion from Virginia's 147,000 military personnel. Two evenly matched state militaries collide, though it's Virginia's stronger Navy and Air Force that wins the day. An 84,700-person strong Navy and Coast Guard dominates the coastal plain to North Carolina's east and allows Virginia to take the state. Tennessee is mopped up soon after, its 13,400 Army and Marine forces being no match for Virginia's comparable 45,500. West Virginia is another easy win for Virginia. 5,200 military personnel can't do much against Virginia's over 147,000-strong military. Kentucky soon follows, with Virginia relying on its much stronger 15,800 Air Force to counteract the fact that Kentucky has 42,500 Army members on the ground and only 1,400 in their skies. Meanwhile, Texas is in trouble. Florida is fighting against its Navy in the Gulf, while the California and Pacific Fleet attacks the troops it's trying to send into California. It's still getting soldiers through despite the 96,100 people California has on the ground. But Texas is losing a lot of people. It's here where the state's X factor comes into play. Eventually, Florida has to use its Navy to start landing people in the state, where they face a civilian army of over 1 million armed citizens, plus the Texas National Guard. That's too much for Florida to handle, even with its superior naval power, as it only has an Army and Marine force of 31,300, and its own well-armed civilians are isolated within Florida to protect it from attack. Texas also has a much larger Air Force than Florida, allowing it to pepper Florida's Navy with aerial strikes. It's a hard-fought battle, but Texas comes out on top, thanks to its civilian forces. And now, with no direct threats, it's able to send National Guard and armed citizens toward California. As all of this has been happening, New York has been consolidating a solid power base to the northeast. Though it doesn't have the largest military of the states, just 46,900 personnel in total, it has benefited from the states with larger militaries fighting among themselves. That's left it free to take advantage of its $1.78 trillion economy, third only behind Texas and California, to keep its soldiers well supplied and capable of taking many of the smaller states that surround it. New Hampshire, Vermont, and Massachusetts all fall quickly to New York, as do Rhode Island and Connecticut. New Jersey puts up more of a fight as it has 24,000 military personnel. However, it's been using its 8,900-person strong Air Force to take on Delaware, Maryland, and the District of Columbia. Delaware falls quickly. It only has 8,100 personnel, and the 2,100 soldiers it has on the ground can't fend off New Jersey and its Air Force. The latter two are more than capable of putting up a fight against New Jersey, with Maryland's 47,600 personnel, which include 14,600 naval personnel and 12,200 Air Force personnel, eventually putting a halt to New Jersey's attacks. However, the 14,600 personnel in the District of Columbia have caused problems as Maryland fought off New Jersey. Though Maryland wins that battle as well, taking a second state, it's severely weakened and can't defend itself against the economic powerhouse of New York. The Maryland numbers advantage whittles away, and it eventually falls, though New York is weakened in the process. With those early victories completed, New York is consolidated, surrounded by buffer states. It's going to have to turn its attention to Pennsylvania next, its large neighbor to the south. Back on the West Coast, the war of attrition between Texas and California is finally nearing its end. Through sheer manpower alone, Texas wins the day, taking California's military bases even under constant naval and aerial attacks. That million-strong armed citizenry proved to be the deciding factor, allowing Texas to create a meat grinder after those citizens had helped the state fend off Florida. California is captured, but Texas lost an enormous amount of people in the process. And worse yet, the Pacific Fleet that it now owns isn't going to be especially effective once it turns its attention to Middle America. The state also knows that Alaska will need to be on its agenda sooner or later. Though Alaska has just 9 military bases and 25,100 personnel, a ground invasion is impossible. Texas or whoever else may attack would have to go through neutral Canada. Still, the newly captured Pacific Fleet will prove extremely useful when the time comes. For now, Texas consolidates as it watches the Midwest burn. Colorado has become a key player in the battle for America's heartland. The state's X factor is its collection of expansive mountain ranges, 15 in total with 54 peaks above 14,000 feet. Those mountains have protected it against Texas so far, though the Lone Star State has been focusing on other states, which means Colorado has had time to send its army on a rampage through the Great Plains. Colorado's power all comes down to the combination of 32,500 Army and Marine soldiers, 15,400 Air Force units, and 2,000 Navy and Coast Guard forces. Kansas is first on the agenda. Though it has a strong army of its own, 29,400 units total, Colorado's superior Air Force makes a huge difference. It allows Colorado to run coordinated attacks on Kansas soldiers, leaving its ground forces free to mop up the scraps. Utah and Wyoming offer little competition either. The latter only has 6,000 military personnel, almost all of whom are in an air force that's less than half the size of Colorado's, allowing the Centennial State to easily dominate on the ground. As for Utah, it faces the same situation. Its 8,700 Army and Marine members can't hold off Colorado, even though its 6,800-strong Air Force provides aerial support. 3 states down in short succession for Colorado. The state then begins to advance northward. Idaho is next up for Colorado, and it again faces the same fate as Utah and Wyoming. An impressive 4,500-strong Air Force makes up the majority of its military forces. Colorado overwhelms that Air Force with one that's 3 times the size, and its army easily mops up the 3,800 people Idaho has on the ground. The only thing slowing Colorado down is the size of the states it's taking. Idaho alone is over 83,000 square miles, making it the 14th largest state by landmass. That's a lot of territory for Colorado's advancing army to cover as it moves on to Montana, another massive state. But again, Colorado benefits from facing a state with practically no ground forces to confront it. Just 2,900 soldiers are in Montana's army, rendering its 4,300-strong Air Force practically moot. With some of the largest Mountain West states taken, Colorado turns its attention to its northeastern borders and Nebraska. The home of the Great Plains and the dissected Till Plains, Nebraska has an average elevation of 2,600 feet, but it's mostly flat land. That would be fine if its 7,100-strong Air Force was larger than that of an invader. That isn't the case with Colorado. The state's Air Force has over twice as many members, and it's supporting a far larger army than Nebraska can offer up. The state puts up a slightly better fight than the ones Colorado has faced so far, but it ends up falling just the same. Again, it's down to a lack of boots on the ground. 4,400 infantrymen can't stand up to 33,000. With that, Colorado has secured its eastern, western, and northern borders, though it still faces a problem with the depleted Texas to the south. It prepares a strike now. Waiting would give Texas a chance to recuperate and pull in people from the states it's already taken. Meanwhile, Virginia is buoyed by no longer having to worry about Florida. That leaves it free to focus on some of the smaller states to its west. Through the taken territory of West Virginia, it attacks Ohio. A fairly simple victory is achieved, as Ohio has 32,000 military personnel. Virginia's aerial might has an edge too, with about 3,000 more units than Ohio's 13,400. With that, Virginia has penned New York into the Northeast, at least in terms of a land invasion. For New York to invade now, it'll have to do so via the Atlantic coast. That particular fact presents a problem for a state that only has 3,700 naval and Coast Guard personnel. But it may not matter. New York finds itself tied up in fighting against Pennsylvania, the state directly to its south. Granted, the battle doesn't last long, as Pennsylvania has nearly half as many military personnel, with 27,700. Still, the battle is enough to weaken New York a little, and it still doesn't have an inroad into Virginia. Worse yet for New York, Virginia is finally taking advantage of its powerful navy. As 51,000 Army and Air Force units move toward Indiana and Michigan, the remaining 96,400-strong Navy, Coast Guard, and Marine units are easily winning the Atlantic Coast battle. New York can't compete. Its 3,700-member Navy and Coast Guard offer little defense to the naval onslaught. Indiana is subsequently obliterated by the invading Virginian Army. With just 17,200 military personnel to its name, the state can barely put up much of a fight. Despite almost 45% of its population owning guns, Virginia's army puts an end to any ambitions Indiana might have had of becoming America's strongest state. Michigan suffers the same fate. With a similar-sized force of 15,400, it's still nowhere near strong enough to take on Virginia, resulting in the state dominating almost the entire East Coast, as well as giving it a chance to delve deeper into the center of America. It'll have that chance soon enough as Colorado mounts its attack on Texas. Colorado's plan is to strike quickly after Texas's defeat of California in order to give it an advantage. The Lone Star State lost tens of thousands of its army members, as well as several 100,000 of its armed citizens when taking California. The fatigue from the campaign is at a point where Colorado's 50,000 fighting force could stand a chance. The problem for Colorado becomes apparent, however, as it navigates its own mountainous southern regions. The very mountains that had protected it from Texas also served to protect Texas from Colorado. A rough passage through those mountains leads to Colorado's soldiers being exhausted by the time they engage with Texas. And for the first time, Colorado also finds itself on the losing end of the aerial battle. Having more than 15,000 Air Force personnel may have worked while taking much of the neighboring states, but it doesn't stack up to a Texan Air Force that's around 3 times the size. Colorado's invasion attempts turn out to be folly. It's soon defeated, having barely made it past its own southern mountains. In the meantime, Virginia is left to take on the rest of the American Midwest. Wisconsin falls easily enough, with its 13,300 military personnel being no match for Virginia. The same goes for Maine, with just 4,100 military personnel. However, Virginia faces more of a fight when it confronts Illinois and Iowa. The former has to be taken first, as the latter takes advantage of Illinois lying between it and Virginia's roving army. With 42,500 military personnel, Illinois has a solid chance against the weakening Virginia. The problem is that its navy is stationed at Naval Station Great Lakes. They're guarding waters that Virginia isn't going to use. With that issue, Illinois can do little more than use the navy to conduct missile strikes from the waters onto its own territory. That's not enough to stop Virginia as it takes the state. Iowa is destroyed in no time. 10,900 military personnel are no match for Virginia. All the while, Texas watches and waits. Virginia continues its campaign of destruction. Minnesota soon falls too, with a military presence in the state at just 17,700 personnel. Missouri, on the other hand, represents more of a problem. It has 29,800 personnel, with 21,200 of them being Marines and Army soldiers. They fortify the Mississippi River, which makes up most of the eastern border Virginia needs to penetrate, and force the Virginian armies into an attritional battle. Virginia still comes out on top. It has a strong numbers advantage, but it loses thousands of fighters in the process. Those losses aren't enough to stop South and North Dakota from falling, with their militaries of 7,600 and 11,500 respectively. That finally leaves Virginia one place to go next: Texas. As Virginia prepares to attack, Texas has recuperated and restocked thanks to its strong economy and massive oil reserves. Its Gulf Coast fleet has sailed around Florida and into the Atlantic coast, where it confronts Virginia's navy at Naval Station Norfolk. As for the Texan ground forces, they may have been depleted, but they're still strong enough in numbers to attack Virginia, especially with the state having expended so many of its soldiers in the Midwest. Texas takes Virginia right before the state can launch an attack of its own. All that's left for Texas is to use the Pacific Fleet it captured from California to assault the isolated Alaska. The state puts up a fight, especially with its 11,100-strong Air Force. The rough waters in the Gulf of Alaska also make it difficult for the Pacific Fleet to coordinate attacks. But in the end, that waterborne power is enough, especially when combined with fighter jets and helicopters taking off from the Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers. Alaska succumbs. And with that, Texas stands victorious as the strongest state from the United States. Of course, this is just one of many possible scenarios that could happen if America's states turned against one another. Do you think Texas would win? Could another state put up a legitimate challenge to its supremacy? Let us know what you think in the comments. And if this video caught your interest, feel free to check out our video on why everyone is afraid of the US military, or this other video you might like. Thanks for watching, and take care out there.